Costumes. Many of us wear them. They may not be as obvious as a ruff, a wig, a large skirt, and a corset, but we wear them. We're all born with unique gifts, traits, talents that make us who we are. The universe gives us these things, much like a fingerprint. Our hearts, our spirits, and our energies are all one of a kind. You're one of a kind. That's what makes this world a beautiful landscape of experiences, perspectives, and individuality. But over time, we're taught that it's not okay to be our unique selves. It's not okay to speak freely of our experiences, share our perspectives, and celebrate our individuality. And these messages can come from a number of places: society, the media, our families, or maybe they're just the lies that we tell ourselves that we're not good enough. And so we put on these costumes to cover up who we truly are. And they can be a number of things, and they're much heavier than the one that I'm wearing today. We wear shame. We wear the character destroyer fear, the spirit killer insecurity, the pain of pressure. We wear all of these things that hinder our ability to just be ourselves. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. That quote is maybe from one of Shakespeare's most popular, I would say, plays, As You Like It. And it's such a powerful statement about the phases of life. And it inspires the thought or the question, what if during this time we're all living and working and playing on this stage or in the world, we never get the opportunity to play the most important role or part, our authentic selves. About 4 seasons ago, or almost 4 years ago, I got the opportunity to be my authentic self and to celebrate my individuality when I started a nonprofit theater company in Detroit called Shakespeare in Detroit. The platform has given me the gift of creating inclusive productions of the Bard's work that also reflect my personal values of community, true diversity, and the celebration of the human spirit. As a bigger picture, though, I'm also able to give other artists the opportunity to serve as mirrors and windows for the world and expose people to experiences and cultures, religions, races that may be the same or different than their own. And it's truly a gift. I consider it a privilege to be the first Black woman serving as artistic director of a Shakespeare company in North America. And I've looked, and doing it with an accessible template that we call site-specific Shakespeare. So that means that we perform in the places people live, where they work, and where they play. We bring Shakespeare to those who otherwise would not have access to his work. But it took quite some time to get to this point. It was a long journey for me because for a very, very long time, I wore several costumes, namely insecurity and fear. Maybe you too have worn these costumes, these things that can suffocate our authenticity, those things that used to tell me, you don't have what it takes to run a Shakespeare company. Maybe those people were right who said you didn't deserve the cover of that magazine. Maybe the folks who said you weren't trained traditionally, so your insights and your experience don't matter. Maybe they were telling the truth. These costumes, they can take hold of our spirits and chip away at our authenticity, because the truth of the matter is that it's easier to assimilate and to wear them than to be our authentic selves. Let's face it, we live in a world where it can be dangerous to be who you are. You could be bullied, you could be threatened, you could be killed for simply being yourself. So what do? It reminds me of one of my personal favorite quotes of Shakespeare from Julius Caesar. It is not in the stars to hold our destiny, but in ourselves. Our fates are not left up to the stars. They're not left up to someone's opinions of what our lives should be. They're not left up to fate. they're not left up to anything or anyone other than us. The universe has given us the gift of individuality. Now is the time to decide, what will we do with those unique gifts, those traits, those talents that make us who we are? But what does that mean, makes us who we are? A lot of us lose ourselves in the context of this thing called life. So what do you do? Well, what I know from my own personal experience and my journey with Mr. William Shakespeare is that the answer has been with me my entire life. It lives within us all. When we remove these costumes and we allow ourselves to just be. I'll share a personal anecdote or two. I've always loved singing, acting, dancing, always. My mother told me I've been singing since I was 6 months old. Performing has always been a source of comfort, and it's allowed me to express myself authentically and truthfully. And so she encouraged that always. She would take me to lessons. She'd take me to the theater, my mother would. She'd take me to the bookstore, to the library. She also would allow me to be in school plays, and I consider this the highlight of my life. For 12 years, I was the featured entertainment for her and my father's annual anniversary party. Whether or not our friends and their family, our family and my parents' friends, if they wanted to or not, they were going to see Sam do a pirouette. Several, actually. One thing that I also loved as a kid was rap music. Loved it a lot. Loved everything about it. The rhythm, the beat. My mother hated it. She still hates it. And she wouldn't allow my brother or I to listen, but I'd sneak and listen anyway. And I had this little gray boom box, if anybody remembers what that is. And I would sneak and listen. I thought she couldn't hear me. One day I was in my room, and I was listening to the Legends, Salt and Pepper. Push It was on the radio this day, and I had my bedroom door closed, and I thought I was being sneaky. I thought all was well. I thought she couldn't hear me. The speaker was firmly pressed against my ear as I enjoyed Push It. Eventually, I heard a really, really loud knock on the door. I mean, the firmest knock I have ever heard in my entire life. When I opened it, it was my mother. Mothers hear everything, don't they? When I answered it, she had this big old smelly book in her hands. And she handed it to me and said, "If you like lyrics so much, read this." That book was the complete works of William Shakespeare, and I looked through it. I looked through it some more. And I hated everything about that book. I mean, I hated it. I could not understand it. The words were weird. I couldn't tell what I was reading. And I was only 8 years old at the time, so the stories and the characters were a little beyond my comprehension. But over time, eventually, I fell in love with the bard. Now, as I said, my mother has always encouraged me to explore different creative outlets, singing, acting, dancing. So when I became an adult, I thought, hey, I'll try out stand-up comedy. So I moved to Las Vegas because I just knew I was going to be the next Rodney Dangerfield. In my head, I knew I was going to be a famous stand-up comedian. That did not happen. I ended up getting a job instead at the public and classical radio stations for Las Vegas, Nevada, and Henderson, Nevada, KNPR and KCNV. And while I was there, my friend Sarah invited me on the bus trip with some of our listeners. She was in charge of organizing the trip. She invited me to go to the Utah Shakespeare Festival. I had never been to Utah, but I said, sure, I love Shakespeare, let's go. And so we hopped on the bus, and right there in the middle of the desert was this beautiful, magical Shakespearean experience. That was inspirational for me. I looked around and I thought, okay, if they can do this in the desert, then surely we can do this in Detroit, where we have plenty of buildings, historical sites, and parks. That would be perfect for Shakespeare. And so I went home a few weeks after that. Now, this was 2008. Bad time to come back to Detroit. It was a really bad time to come back. The automotive industry was failing. And so finding a job became my priority and finding a place to live as well. But a few years after that, in 2012, I heard of this really cool place called Tech Town in Midtown Detroit for aspiring entrepreneurs who maybe had an idea but they didn't know what to do with that idea or how to kickstart their businesses. And I went there, and I created a feasibility plan and a business plan. A year later, Shakespeare in Detroit got its very first show, Othello, at Grand Circus Park. That's the patch of green that's right outside of Comerica Park where the Detroit Tigers play. Now, I have to tell you, the first show was a few weeks after the city filed for bankruptcy, and so I didn't know if anyone would care. I knew that I wanted the show to be accessible, so we didn't charge tickets. We just wanted everyone, regardless of their income, to come enjoy Othello. But when you don't sell tickets, you can't gauge attendance. I knew my mom would come, I have to say that. I did know she'd be there. But right before the show, I looked out into the audience, and there were 500 people there. People of all races, ages, backgrounds, incomes, from the city, from outside the city. They were all there to see this beautiful, magical thing happening in the city for the first time. Othello at Grand Circus Park, and with an all-local cast. It was inspirational for me. It was motivation to continue. To date, Shakespeare in Detroit has produced 10 high-quality professional productions and engaged with 8,000 people. And when I think about the first 3 seasons at Shakespeare in Detroit, now gearing up for the 4th, we're hoping to produce Henry V and Hamlet in 2017. Please come over the bridge and see us. But when I think about those first 3 seasons at the theater company, I'm taken right back to my bedroom, right back there, sneaking and listening to Salt and Pepper on my gray boombox, hearing that firm knock at the door, my mother handing me the complete works of William Shakespeare. If she hadn't done that, I would have never started Shakespeare in Detroit. She planted the seeds that would become the catalyst for the most beautiful, amazing, impactful experience of my life. Shakespeare in Detroit allows me to celebrate my love for acting, my love for dancing, my love for singing, and my mother's required love for Shakespeare. So how do you remove these costumes so that you can, as Shakespeare wrote, to thine own self be true, without the interruption or the intrusion of fear, insecurity, people's opinions, and all the psychological impediments? How do you tune in to those things that you loved as a child or learned to love? I believe that the answer is to be still. Shakespeare wrote in Henry V, Act 3, Scene 1, "There is nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness." Sit with yourself, journal. Take time to invest in yourself. Remember what you loved to do as a child. Focus on the future and be patient. The answer is there. We were all once kids, laughing, joking, dreaming, fantasizing about what we wanted to be when we grew up, long before these costumes showed up. How often are you still? How often do you turn off the cell phone? How often do you walk away from email? How often do you, dare I say, deactivate your social media accounts to just, be? Just be. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles, I think the answer is, to be. Authenticity, let me tell you, it is not easy to maintain, but it's worth the fight. You could be free of these costumes, the things that hold us back, like shame, Shame can prevent you from being the person you want to be, the person that you should be. You go around in the world pretending to be someone else because maybe you're afraid the world won't accept you. Your friends won't accept you. Your family won't accept you. You pretend to be someone else, and this is hard to bear. People's opinions and society standards, they can restrict you, much like an Elizabethan corset, which can restrict breathing and movement. It doesn't allow the freedom to move and grow. It can be painful and uncomfortable. Pressure. There's a lot of pressure in life. We have so many responsibilities. We have to take care of our families. We have to pay the bills and all the things that come with growing up and the implications of adulthood. It can be heavy, much like an Elizabethan skirt, which can be heavy and restrict you from the freedom that you would otherwise have without it. We decorate our lives with these things to make them look so pretty and perfect and pristine. Beautifully aesthetic distractions that make people think that we're happy or we're content or we have it together when we really don't. But now is the time to reveal those gifts, those traits, those talents that the universe has given us so you can be free. You can be free to just be. When that question arises in your life, I hope you think of this moment now and you are inspired when asked or when the thought comes into your mind to be or not to be. Definitively proclaim to be. My name is Sam White. I'm the founder of Shakespeare in Detroit. With me today is the director of costumes, Schwartz. Thank you for having us.